Hello, folks. Welcome back to the Catholic OCD Podcast. We are continuing through our Bible study through the Gospel according to St. Matthew. We are going to finish chapter 5 and go through chapter 6 today. Stay tuned. It should be a good one. Okay, so as always, if you enjoy this podcast, or even if you don't, go ahead and make sure that you hit that like and subscribe button down below. I'm guessing it's down below on your phone or computer or whatever you have. Every like and subscription helps to this for this podcast. What I want to do is I want to continue through Matthew. We're going through the end of chapter 5. We're continuing on the Sermon on the Mount. And we kind of ended last time just because we were going a little long and we got to a part that not everybody likes about Matthew chapter 5. And it was very deep, and I just didn't want to rush through it. So we learned about Jesus talking about the Beatitudes and how we're the salt of the earth and how, we have to let our light shine, and teaching about anger, and Jesus talking about how he didn't come to abolish the law, but how to fulfill the law. And then he started teaching about adultery. And you've heard it say, thou shalt not commit adultery. But I say any man who even looks at a woman and lusts for her commits adultery in his own heart. Jesus gets to the root of sin. The root of sin is from the heart. So after he's talking about the root of sin, which is in the heart when it comes to adultery, now Jesus is going to talk about actual marriage and divorce. Now, we have to remember that at this time, women don't have a lot of rights. From the Old Testament point of view, we've seen men who had 700 wives and 300 concubines, like Solomon. A lot of men who have multiple wives. It really has fallen away from the initial way that God created humanity. He created them male and female. That's God's initial plan. Was for Adam and Eve to be one, to where Adam could say to Eve, truly you're a bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. But because of the sin of humanity, this really falls apart. And we saw even among the Jews, we saw great men who just have multiple wives and do things with their wives, like even Abraham, who pimps out his wife in Egypt. We see just some terrible stuff done to marriage. And Jesus is coming to fulfill the law. He's coming to purify the Christian faith. He's coming to purify the true faith. So he wants to get things back to the first covenant, really the first sacrament, which is marriage. And now Jesus has to correct all these things about marriage, and he wants to get things back to the way God intended it. So Jesus says in chapter 5, verse 31, it was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a bill of divorce. But I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful, causes her to commit adultery. And whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. What's that mean? Let's read that again. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife must give her a bill of divorce. So this is the Old Testament understanding from Moses, okay? You could divorce your wife, you write her a bill of divorce, okay? And that legally terminated the marriage, which was kind of viewed as this legal contract between two persons. And Jesus is saying, in the Old Testament, this is the mode in which he's saying. You've heard it say, don't commit adultery. I'm saying don't even lust after somebody. You've heard it say, thou shalt not murder. I'm saying don't even hate anybody. Like, this is what Jesus is trying to do, get us to the heart of the problem. So now Jesus is saying, you've heard it say that if you divorce your wife, you got to write her a bill of divorce. He's like, nah, this is what I'm telling you. If you divorce your wife for any reason other than marital unlawfulness, in some ways this is translated. Sometimes you'll see it as marital unfaithfulness. The NIV used to translate it to marital unfaithfulness. In the King James would translate it to adultery. So it could seem like, okay, depending on what word this is, if any man divorces his wife for any reason other than, let's say, adultery, he causes her to be an adulterer, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Is this what Jesus is saying? Is he using the term adultery? Like, is adultery the one aspect where, okay, you can break the marriage contract? Somebody committed adultery. That was the one thing that they could do. And therefore, yeah, it's broken, and now the husband is free to marry. Is that what this is saying? No. The way we know this is because this word is actually porneia. And so if any man divorces his wife for any reason other than porneia, he causes her to be an adulterer. If porneia just means, which porneia comes from the word, where we get the word pornography. If it just means adultery, then when it says he causes her to be an adulterer, we should see that same word. We don't. The word that's used for her being an adulterer is different than the root of the word for committing adultery. So the way that this word needs to be translated is basically a sexual unlawfulness. If any man divorces his wife for any reason other than sexual unlawfulness, which means there's something messed up with the marriage. There's something that's unlawful about the marriage. If you watch the Chosen, John the Baptist is very hard on Herod, and he doesn't want Herod to be married to his brother's wife. And in the Chosen, it kind of makes, it seem like Jesus says to John the Baptist, like, listen, I'm not concerned about these little details. That's total heresy there. Jesus never says that. Read Jesus right here. But John the Baptist is telling Herod, you can't do this because it's actually unlawful. Every time you're sleeping with your wife, you're actually sinning because this is your brother's wife. You're sinning. You can't do this. This is unlawful. John the Baptist isn't trying to tell Herod, like, God would be okay with you if you got divorced. He's saying you need to get divorced. You can marry somebody, find out that they're your relative. You could be like, remember on Tommy Boy, that movie, when they end up realizing that Tommy's dad was married to a lady who actually was already married to another man. So therefore, since they were legally married, then Tommy's dad's marriage to her wasn't valid. This is what it really means, that it's a sexually unlawful marriage. It's an invalid marriage. It could be founded on a lie. It could be somebody could have been forced into it. This is supposed to be the purpose of the annulment system, where the church can look and say through a tribunal of like, okay, yeah, this is an invalid marriage, therefore they grant you an annulment. An annulment is not supposed to be basically the Catholic divorce system, where it's basically Catholic divorce, only we just changed the name from divorce to annulment. I believe it could be a very often abused thing. But Jesus here is saying, like, yeah, once you're married, that's it. I mean, unless there's something jacked up with the marriage where there's an unlawfulness with the marriage, there's a sexual, immorality in the marriage, like where it's unchaste for you to actually be in a sexual relationship with your spouse. Like, unless there's something jacked up with the foundation of that marriage, somebody didn't have freedom to be married. You were kidnapped somebody. They're related. They're all these different things. Jesus is saying, then that's it. And if a man just says, I don't want to be with this wife, and then he breaks that off, then he is causing her and him to be adulterers. And anybody who marries them commits adultery. I know this sounds tough, and this is kind of like forgotten. Like nobody likes talking about this, but I don't get paid, so I cannot get fired. So you have to hear it from me. Now, one of the things I'm going to show you to kind of back this up a little bit more is I want to read to you from Matthew 19. So this is later on. And when Jesus was walking through a region, there were two schools of thought with the Jews at this time. Two schools of thought. And so you had the Beit Shammai, and they held that a man may only divorce his wife for like a serious transgression, like maybe like she, had an affair. So they held it like this was like the very strict sense that they said, like this school of thought said, only if it's like this really bad thing can you divorce your wife. But then the other school, the Bet Hillel, they allowed divorce for any trivial offense, even burning a meal. Okay? Even burning a meal. If that was the case, there'd be a lot of divorced men out there. And you better be a good cook. But you could see one school was like, yeah, listen, we're trying to be holy. You can only divorce your wife. Very serious thing. Maybe she has an affair, this or that. The other school was very much on the side of the men. And it was like, listen, yeah, you don't like her face. She wore a red dress. You told her to wear a blue dress. Divorce her. She burnt your toast. She's out of there. When Jesus walks into this area and these two different schools with the Pharisees, they want to test him because this is a big debate that they've had. And they argue about this. Which one's right? Which school of thought is right? Now here comes Jesus. So they're like, let's ask Jesus. It says when Jesus, this is in chapter 19 of Matthew, when Jesus finished these words, he left Galilee and went to the district of Judea across the Jordan. Great crowds followed him, and he cured them there. Some Pharisees approached him and tested him, saying, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any cause whatever? He said in reply, have you not read that from the beginning the Creator made them male and female? And said, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So there are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, no human being must separate. Jesus here is like really strict. Like they're like, wait a minute. Wait, I mean, the one school is like, well, we could divorce her if she had an affair, right? Or she like does something really jacked up. And the other school is like, well, we should be able to divorce her for any reason. And Jesus actually denies both of those schools. And he's like, no, you can't divorce her. You can't. It doesn't work that way. A man leaves his mother and father. He clings to his wife. The two become one. And what God's joined together, like man can't separate. You can't go to Judge Judy or go downtown and just because somebody said like, oh, a judge said, oh, you're divorced. Oh, well, I guess we're divorced then. No, Jesus is saying once God truly joins you together, a red paint mixes with a white paint and it becomes pink paint. You can't ever separate the colors again. Once it's this sacramental marriage between a baptized man and a baptized woman Christian, it's a sacrament. And when it's truly valid, it's inseparable. The only thing that could separate it is death. That's why we say, till death do us part. So their immediate question is, wait a minute. You're saying we can't get divorced. Then why did Moses, they say, why did Moses command that a man give a woman a bill of divorce and dismiss her? So they're like, wait a minute, Jesus, if I can't get a divorce, if I can't divorce my wife, then why did Moses command that a man write his wife a bill of divorce and separate from her? And Jesus said to them, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed you to divorce your wives. But from the beginning, it was not so. I say to you, whoever divorces his wife, unless the marriage is unlawful. This again is this porneia, this sexual unlawfulness, and marries another, commits adultery. So Jesus here is saying something really strict. He's basically saying, like, listen, no, your wife cheats on you. Your wife does this. Your husband does that. If you divorce them for any reason other than the marriage not being valid in the first place, then that's it. You got to stay celibate. And if not, then whoever marries the other commits adultery. Now, you can understand these men and even the disciples, because the disciples are thinking that we've never heard anything this strict. Man, that's jacked up. What are you thinking then? Like on honest thought could be like, well, who the heck would want to get married? Well, it's funny because then it says his disciples said to him, if that is the case of a man with his wife, it is better not to marry. Like, this is their honest thought. They're actually saying, like, you know what? If it's going to be that strict, who the heck wants to get married? It's better not to be married. Now, what does Jesus say? Like, oh, no, you're misunderstanding me. I didn't mean it like that. No, what Jesus is going to say here is Jesus is going to say, not all can accept this word, but only those to whom that it is granted. Some are incapable of marriage because they were born so. Some because they were made so by others. Some because they have renounced marriage for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. Whoever can accept this ought to accept it. What this is here is you see this tie in with celibacy. A lot of people don't understand like why priests take this vow of celibacy. But the biblical teaching is that it's better for a man in ministry to be celibate than to be married. That's the biblical teaching. Paul's going to say a married man is anxious about the things of his wife. An unmarried man in ministry is anxious about the things of God. Here, Jesus is saying the same thing. When the apostles are saying, like, well, geez, man, if it's going to be this strict with marriage, it might be better not to be married. And Jesus is like, listen, not everybody can do this. That's a gift. Celibacy for the ministry is a gift. And he says not everybody can do it. And he says some are born this way. Some are incapable of marriage because they were born so. And this can mean they do not have the, let's say, the sexual faculties to consummate a marriage. Because a marriage, in order for it to be valid, the man has to at least mate and consummate the marriage at least once. And there are some men who can't. Some men who can't. So Jesus is saying, like, for them to be celibate, like, yeah, there's some, they can't have sex. Like, they have to be celibate. But then he said, and then some do this because they were born so, some because they were made so by others. This would often happen with, like, the eunuchs. So kings, often when they would have bodyguards for, like, their daughters, sometimes they would actually neuter their male bodyguards for their daughter, just so that that male bodyguard doesn't end up, coming onto, like, their daughter. And then Jesus also says so because they were made so by others, and some then, Jesus says, because they have renounced marriage. There are men, Jesus says, who renounce marriage. They renounce sex because they've done this for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. And whoever can accept this ought to accept it. Jesus is saying here, this is shocking stuff, right? People are like, where's this verse at? Because sometimes people be like, what about the priests? Don't you think they should be married? And don't you think it's stupid that they can't get married? And sometimes I'm like, do people read the Bible? Like, this comes from Jesus. Jesus is saying, if you have the gift of being able to forsake marriage for the sake of the kingdom, then you should. Like, not everybody can do it. Paul says the same thing. He says it's better for a man not to be married. And if you can, he's like, this gift isn't granted to everybody. But, this is something that, if you could do it, you should. But Paul's going to say, but if you can't, it's better for you to marry than to just burn with this passion. So that's the question is, like, what happened to all the celibate preachers. I know everybody rips on like Catholics a lot of times and stuff like that, but like how many non-Catholic or non-Orthodox preachers or pastors do you know that are just like, yeah, I've got this gift, so I'm just forsaking marriage just so I could dedicate my life to God. Like, I feel like this is really a lost thing here. So anyways, back to Matthew chapter 5. Now, teaching about oaths. Again, verse 33, you have heard that it was said to your ancestors, do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow. But I say to you, do not swear at all, not by heaven, for it is God's throne, nor by the earth, for it is his footstool, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. Do not swear by your head, for you cannot make a single hair white or black. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. Sometimes with taking oaths, the more somebody has to make you, the more they have to say to get you to believe them, the more it kind of means that they're just an untrustworthy person. If you ask somebody, listen, when I do this job for you, will you pay me? And they just look at you, they say, I will pay you when you're done. You might go, But if somebody, even before done, listen, man, when you do this, like, I swear, gosh, I'll pay you, man. I swear I'm good for it. I'm good for it, man. And I'm going to pay you, and I swear, and if I don't pay you, may lightning strike me dead. Trust me, because your money, trust me, it's good. I'm good for it. I'm good. You're going to be like, yeah, you're probably, why do you have to convince me that you don't lie? And this is Jesus' point. Just tell the truth always. There's no need to swear over your head, over all these things you don't have control over. I hate some people like, I swear on my dead ancestor's grave. First of all, why would you even do that? Second of all, like, what are you saying? Like, I swear on my kid's soul. Like, why would you do that? That's not from God. That's from Satan. Like, were you going to put that on me? Like, you lie to me? And I got worried about, like, what? Because you lied to me, like, your kid's going to die? Like, no. Just say yes or say no. Then when it comes to teaching about retaliation, you have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, offer no resistance to the one who is evil. When someone strikes you on your right cheek, turn the other one to him as well. If anyone wants to go to the law with you over your tunic, hand him your cloak as well. Should anyone press you into service for 1 mile, go with him for 2 miles. Give to the one who asks of you, and do not turn your back on those who want to borrow. This gets into like an idea of like that we've also lost in the Christian church today. One of the things Paul really rips on in 1 Corinthians is the idea of like the Christian communities taking fellow Christians to the court system to have atheist judges rule on them. Paul's like, this is the saddest thing in the world. And all of how we act really needs to be acted through a Christian understanding. And to where we give to people who need it. And this sounds really hard because this is tied into like loving your enemies, which is coming up next. But you think about this, like Jesus asked for forgiveness for the people that are killing him. Like, that's hard. It's hard. It is. But this is actually the call of Christianity. This is the perfect love where you give to people. You don't want anything back. You just want to serve God. I think it's a funny thing today in this day and age. I actually feel bad. Like, interest rates are really high. And, my wife does realty. And a lot of times you see people they're trying to buy like a little house for themselves and their family, and people who don't necessarily have the most money. And we're living in this day now where like every house that comes up that's actually affordable, just investors come. They buy up every house, and they just rent it out, for like really high rent. And I don't know. I mean, it's one thing, you're doing it in a fair way, but usually people who are renting are in hard situations. And when you're just gouging them, I don't know. I don't know. Read this. I mean, is this the case of how we're supposed to operate? Verse 43. You've heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your heavenly Father. For he makes his sun rise on the bad and the good, and causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what recompense will you have? Do not the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet your brothers only, what is unusual about that? Do not the pagans do the same? So be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. I mean, loving your enemies is tough, right? I mean, it's a tough thing to do. But he's saying that's the idea of what makes you a Christian. Loving people that are nice to you. Why? There's a reason you should love people that are nice to you. It benefits you. Don't bite the hand that feeds you. There's a lot of wisdom in it. But like loving people who treat you like crap, praying for people who treat you bad, it's a hard thing to do. Sometimes I admit myself, I can get overwhelmed. I can start to get bitter. You could feel the hate growing. Oftentimes when that happens, I'll find where I have to pray for somebody. Pray for somebody that I can't, stand. And it's hard to hate somebody that you pray for. If you hate somebody, if there's somebody in your life that you absolutely hate, spend a week and pray for them every day for a week. And you'll find it's a hard time. You'll have a hard time hating them. Now, there's a difference, though, between hating them versus, we're not allowed to hate anybody. But at the same time, you are allowed to escape abuse. Like if somebody just always tearing you down, causing trouble in your life, like you don't have to inflict yourself around them. You don't have to allow them just to abuse you, whether it's physically or mentally. I mean, the apostles took a beating, but they didn't just run into jail cells looking for a beating. So we're going to go ahead, end that there. That was enough for today, finishing chapter 5. So next week, then we'll be able to go through chapter 6 and chapter 7. And I promise we will get through both of those. Hope you guys like this Bible part. When you go through the Bible, you don't get as many views, but I don't care. It's my favorite thing to do. It's just actually going through the scriptures. So if you like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Catholic OCD Podcast. And we will see you guys next time. And actually, I'm going to release this tonight. So tomorrow, August 15th, will be 1 year anniversary since I started releasing podcast episodes. See you guys. Check you out next time. Peace.